I'm Bridget, and welcome to my kitchen where I help busy families eat well with wholesome and delicious recipes. This week is all about homemade gift ideas, edible gifts that are easy to make and wonderful to share with family and friends. Today I'll show you how to make 3 of my favorites: a homemade cookie mix for orange spice crinkle cookies, an easy apple cranberry sauce that's ready in under 30 minutes, and deliciously sweet and spicy gingerbread almonds that are surprisingly easy to make. Our first edible gift is a homemade cookie mix. The mix includes the dry ingredients for an orange spice crackle cookie. This is a classic ginger cookie with a delightful orange twist. We'll start with 1 cup packed of dark brown sugar. You put that in the bottom of the bottle. And once we get it in the bottle, we're going to pack it down because we'll need room for all of the flour. To pack it down, I just use a spoon to get it around the edges and on top. If you use a wide mouth jar, it'll be easier to fit maybe a wooden spoon in or something else. But this will work to pack it down just enough to be able to fit the remaining ingredients. Next, we'll measure 3 cups of flour into a mixing bowl. And I always spoon or scoop my flour in so I don't end up with too much flour. Because if you scoop the whole 1 cup measure in, then you'll end up with more flour than you actually need. You can level your measuring cup with the edge of a knife so you have an exact amount. Now to the flour, we're going to add half a teaspoon of ginger, 1 full teaspoon of cinnamon. The final 2 spices are cloves and allspice. I've combined them in this little bowl. It's just 1/8 of a teaspoon of cloves and 1/4 of a teaspoon of allspice. To that, we will add 1½ teaspoons of baking soda. And the final ingredient for the dry mix is the zest of an orange, or about a tablespoon of orange zest. Before you zest your orange, give it a good scrub and dry it well, and then you can zest it either with a rasp or with the small side of a box grater. When you're zesting the orange, make sure you just get the outer zest and not the white pith underneath, because that's a little bit bitter. It's the orange zest that has all of the flavor. We're going to whisk all of these ingredients together and then spoon them into the jar on top of the brown sugar. The orange zest smells so beautiful. And when these cookies are all mixed up and in the oven, the whole kitchen will smell like orange. This is a 1-liter mason jar, and it's just big enough to fit the flour mixture on top of the brown sugar. Now we can package this up with a bow, and we'll include the full recipe so they know how to bake the cookies with this mixture, but then they'll have the recipe so they can make these cookies on their own the next time. Remember, this jar only includes the dry ingredients for the orange spice crinkle cookies. I'll show you how to make the full recipe. We'll start by creaming a full cup of butter. Once the butter is creamed, we're going to add ½ a cup of molasses, an egg that is also room temperature, and a teaspoon of vanilla. I'm going to mix the molasses in with the butter before I add the egg. A room temperature egg will give your cookies more lift. And if your egg is cold, you can just put it in a bowl of warm water for 5 minutes or so, and it'll come to room temperature. The final ingredient for the wet mixture is a teaspoon of vanilla. The mixture is looking a little curdled because of the molasses in the egg, but don't worry, once we add the flour mixture, everything will come together. I like to make my own vanilla, and to do that, I just use a small bottle of vodka. This is a 50 ml bottle, and to that I add 1 vanilla bean cut in half, put the lid on, give it a good shake, and let it sit in the cupboard for about a month. Every few days I give it another shake just to help speed up the infusion, but that's how simple it is to make your own vanilla. Okay. The final step in our cookie recipe is just to add everything from our jar to the bowl and give it a good mix. I use a medium cookie scoop to form the balls, or you could make balls that are 1.5 to 2 tablespoons worth of cookie dough. Before we put them on the cookie sheet, we're going to roll them in sugar. This is just regular granulated sugar, but you could use a raw sugar as well. Because the crystals are a little bigger with raw sugar, the cooked cookies or the baked cookies will have a bit more sparkle. I've lined this cookie sheet with parchment paper. I always use parchment paper for my baking because it keeps things from sticking and it keeps things from burning. Our orange spice crinkle cookies are ready, and I can tell that they're ready because the tops are set. Our second edible gift is an apple cranberry sauce. Think classic cranberry sauce with an apple twist. This easy recipe takes under half an hour to make. We'll start by putting our pound of cranberries in a pot. To that, I'm going to add 1.5 cups of white sugar, 1/2 cup of molasses, Now we're going to peel and dice 2 apples. I like to peel my apples with a vegetable peeler because it's quick and I get only the skin. I don't end up losing a lot of the flesh. Doesn't really matter what size apple you choose for this recipe. They just blend in nicely with the cranberries, add a little bit of texture and a tiny bit of flavor. To dice safely, I'm just keeping my fingertips tucked in away from the knife. We'll add the apple to the cranberry mixture. Put a lid on the pot and bring it to a simmer over medium heat. Once you can hear it start to bubble, you can take the lid off, give it a good stir. We'll just let this simmer for 15 minutes or so, and we'll give it a little stir every few minutes. Our sauce has been simmering for about 25 minutes now. I did turn the heat down from medium to low. It's important to keep an eye on this just to make sure that it's not boiling too rapidly and to make sure that it doesn't boil over. But everything has softened nicely, so I'm going to remove it from the heat, let it cool a little bit, and then I'll put it into jars. Now that our cranberry sauce has cooled a little bit, I'm going to put it into jars. You can add a little bit of spicing to this recipe if you want, a pinch of cinnamon, a pinch of cloves, a pinch of allspice. But the molasses in it gives it almost a spicy flavor, so you really don't need any extra flavoring. This cranberry sauce will last in the fridge for at least a couple of weeks. You can use fresh or frozen cranberries for this sauce. Our third edible gift idea is for gingerbread spiced almonds. This sweet and spicy treat is surprisingly easy to make. They make a great hostess gift, and they're delicious served with drinks when you have family and friends over. To make our gingerbread spiced almonds, we're going to start by combining butter, sugar, and spices in a heavy bottomed pot. We have a tablespoon of butter, 2 tablespoons of molasses, we'll add a tablespoon of sugar, just a scant half teaspoon of salt, 1½ teaspoons of ground ginger, 1½ teaspoons of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of cloves. And to add the heat, I'm going to add a few generous grinds of black pepper. You could also use a pinch of cayenne. We're going to warm the pot over medium heat. And once the butter starts to melt, we'll give it a good stir. Now that the mixture is bubbling and the sugar is no longer gritty, I'm going to add 2 cups of raw almonds. I'll stir those to coat. And then we're going to spread them in a single even layer on a parchment-lined cookie sheet, and we'll bake them at 300 degrees for about 20 minutes. It's important to use raw nuts for this because they're going to cook for about 20 minutes. So if you chose toasted nuts, they would end up getting overcooked while they're in the oven. Now, I use almonds for this recipe, but you could also use walnuts, or you could use pecans, or really any favorite nut. We're going to bake them for about 20 minutes, but we'll give them a good stir every few minutes just to make sure that the nuts stay well coated. These have been in for a few minutes, so I'm just going to give them a little bit of a stir. I want them to cook evenly. And they smell delicious already because the spices are nice and hot. We've just left them in for a few more minutes. So they should be ready. I'll do one final test. And a little taste. And they are done. Sweet, spicy, have a nice texture. Delicious. So our almonds have cooled, and now we're going to break them into pieces and package them up in a jar. And I don't want to have all these little shards of sugar make their way into the jar. So I'm actually going to do a two-step process. I'll move the almonds to a clean sheet of parchment paper, and then I'll put them in the jar. I like to package almonds in a glass jar because they're so beautiful. They're shining, they have a nice sheen to them, and that shows through the glass jar. When you can't stuff any more in, just close it up, and now we'll decorate it with a pretty ribbon. It's a busy time of year, but anyone can make these edible gifts if you can grab a spare half hour or so. Homemade gifts are extra special and always thoughtful. I hope you enjoy sharing these gifts with family and friends. Thanks for watching.